The 10-minute nightmare. Why European doctors are terrified of American hospitals. Part 1. The French doctor's shock. Picture this. You are a fully trained, seasoned emergency room physician. You spend your days in Paris, dealing with life and death situations, trauma, severe accidents, and the chaotic rush of the ER. You are a man who is literally desensitized to blood, suffering, and crisis. You understand the exact cost of medical equipment, the price of specialized drugs, and the logistical nightmare of moving a critical patient from point A to point B. You are Dr. Julian Laurent, a French medical professional who thought he had seen everything the world of medicine could possibly throw at him. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for 10 minutes in the back of a New York City ambulance. Dr. Laurent was not in America to work. He was on vacation, taking a much-needed break from the grueling shifts at his home hospital in France. He was doing what millions of tourists do every single year, walking through the bright, blinding lights of Times Square, marveling at the towering skyscrapers, and experiencing the overwhelming energy of Manhattan. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a celebration of a successful year saving lives. Then, the unpredictable happened. It started with a sudden, crushing chest pain, a terrifying sensation that radiated down his left arm. As an ER doctor, Julian knew the signs instantly. This was not a panic attack. This was not indigestion from a heavy American meal. It was an acute cardiovascular event. His heart was failing him in the middle of a crowded sidewalk in a foreign country. He collapsed near the steps of a subway station, gasping for air, clutching his chest. The New York crowd did what any good group of bystanders would do. Someone shouted for help. Someone else immediately dialed 911. Within minutes, the distant wail of a siren pierced through the heavy Manhattan traffic. A standard FDNY-affiliated ambulance arrived at the scene. The paramedics jumped out, performed a rapid assessment, stabilized him with basic oxygen, and loaded him onto a stretcher. The drive to the nearest emergency room took exactly 10 minutes. 10 minutes of flashing red lights, bumpy New York streets, and a standard monitor tracking his vitals. Julian survived. The hospital stabilized his condition, and it turned out to be a severe but treatable cardiac episode. He was alive, he was stable, and he was profoundly grateful to the paramedics who moved so quickly. But the true heart attack did not happen on the sidewalk of Times Square. It happened 3 weeks later, when a plain white envelope arrived at his temporary mailing address. When Dr. Julian Laurent opened that piece of paper, his face drained of all color. His hands began to shake. This was a man who looked at horrific trauma every day without blinking, but this single piece of paper left him physically weak. He stared at the final number printed at the bottom of the page. $4,872. For a 10-minute ambulance ride. Nearly $5,000 for a drive that covered less than 2 miles. There were no advanced surgical procedures performed in that vehicle. There was no open-heart surgery on the move. It was an oxygen mask, a basic saline 4-drip, a standard ECG monitor, and 2 miles of asphalt. To the average American reading this right now, you might be thinking, yeah, that sounds about right. Welcome to New York, buddy. But to a European doctor, to a man who operates within a completely different societal framework, this was not just an expensive bill. This was an absolute moral crime. It was extortion. Dr. Laurent was so profoundly shaken by this experience that he did something most tourists never do. He went public. He shared his bill on international medical forums, wrote an extensive breakdown of the pricing, and openly declared, "I am an ER doctor in France. I know exactly what it costs to run an ambulance. I know the price of the gas, the salary of the medics, the cost of the oxygen. And I am telling you, America is not running a healthcare system. They are running a high-end corporate extortion racket disguised as human mercy." I almost fainted when I saw the bill. If I were an average citizen without savings, this 10-minute ride would have ruined my life. This single statement sent shockwaves across international online communities, triggering a massive, furious debate that hits at the very core of the American identity. It forces us to ask a question that most Americans are too terrified or too numb to answer. How did the richest, most powerful nation on the face of the earth allow its medical system to become an absolute dystopian joke in the eyes of the rest of the civilized world? Part 2. The Global Reaction. America Through Foreign Eyes. When Dr. Laurent's story went viral on platforms like Reddit, X, and international medical blogs, it opened a massive floodgate. It was like looking into a mirror held up by the rest of the planet, and the reflection looking back at America was incredibly ugly. Foreigners from every corner of the globe began chiming in, and their collective reaction was a mixture of absolute horror, confusion, and profound pity. We like to think of ourselves as the leaders of the free world. We boast about our GDP, our military might, our technological innovation, and our cultural dominance. We look down at other nations and preach to them about freedom and human rights. But the moment the conversation shifts to healthcare, the rest of the world looks at America the same way you look at a deeply dysfunctional reality TV family. They are fascinated, but deeply horrified. Let us look at how British citizens responded to Dr. Laurent's bill. Commenters from the United Kingdom, who grow up under the National Health Service, NHS, genuinely could not comprehend the math. In the UK, if you collapse on the street, an ambulance shows up, the paramedics treat you, they take you to the hospital, you get your treatment, and you walk out. The total bill at the end? £0. Nothing. It is paid for collectively through general taxation. When a British person sees a bill for $4,800 for a 10-minute drive, they do not just think it is expensive, they think it is a fictional story. They think it is a typo. One British commentator wrote, "If I received a bill for $5,000 after nearly dying, the stress of the bill would literally cause a second heart attack." How do Americans live like this? How do you step outside your house knowing that a single trip or a broken ankle could strip away your entire life savings? Then came the Australians. Australia uses a hybrid system with Medicare, where ambulance cover varies by state, but even in the most expensive scenarios without insurance, an ambulance ride might cost a few $100s at most. Australian netizens openly mocked the American system, calling it a third world country with a Gucci belt. Think about how devastating that phrase is. A third world country with a Gucci belt. It means we have all the luxury items, all the wealth, all the military hardware, all the billionaire tech moguls, but our basic foundational infrastructure for human survival is completely broken, neglected, and predatory. The critique from Germany and Scandinavia was even more academic and damning. German commentators pointed out that the German healthcare system ensures that nobody is ever financially ruined by illness. If an ambulance is called in Berlin, the patient pays a standard copay of roughly €5 to €10. That is it. The rest is covered by their statutory health insurance. A German user noted, "In Germany, the priority of an emergency worker is to stabilize the human being. In America, it feels like the priority of the system is to check the patient's wallet before checking their pulse. It is barbaric." But the most cutting, painful commentary came from countries that Americans traditionally look down upon in terms of economic development. Users from nations like Colombia, Brazil, and Malaysia joined the debate. They pointed out that even in their developing economies, public healthcare infrastructure ensures that emergency transport is either entirely free or heavily subsidized so that the poor do not die on the sidewalks. A user from Brazil wrote, "We have many problems with crime, poverty, and corruption in Brazil. Our public hospitals can have long wait times. But our system, the SUS, will never charge a poor man thousands of dollars just to ride in a vehicle to the hospital. How can the richest country in human history be less compassionate to its citizens than a developing nation in South America?" Let that sink in for a moment. Let the weight of that international consensus hit your American pride. The global community is not looking at America with envy. They are looking at us with a collective sense of relief that they do not live here. They see our system as an absolute cautionary tale. When European parents send their children to travel or study in the United States, they do not just warn them about gun violence or getting lost in bad neighborhoods. The number one warning European parents give their kids before they visit America is, "Whatever you do, do not get hurt. Do not let anyone call an ambulance for you. If you are sick, take an Uber to the clinic. Think about how deeply embarrassing that is for a nation that calls itself the shining city on a hill. Our medical system has become a global meme, a punchline, an international horror story that other governments use to scare their own citizens into accepting higher taxes. They tell their people, "See, if we privatize our system, we will end up like America, where a 10-minute ride in a van costs more than a used car." Part 3. The Deep Dive. Why is it so broken? To understand how we arrived at this point of absolute insanity, we have to look past the surface-level politics and dive deep into the cold, hard mechanics of the American medical-industrial complex. Why does a 10-minute ambulance ride cost $4,800? Where is that money actually going? Is it going to the heroic paramedics who are working 14-hour shifts and skipping meals to save lives? Is it going into high-tech, space-age equipment inside the vehicle that magically cures you on the road? The answer is a resounding, definitive no. The overwhelming majority of that $4,800 does not go to the frontline workers, nor does it represent the actual physical cost of a trip. The inflation is driven by a toxic, highly corrupt web of corporate greed, private equity exploitation, systemic administrative bloat, and a complete lack of federal regulation. Let us start with the biggest hidden player in the room: private equity firms. Over the last 2 decades, a massive shift has occurred in the United States. Ambulance services used to be primarily run by local municipalities, volunteer fire departments, or nonprofit hospital systems. They were treated as an extension of public safety, just like the police force or the fire department. If your house is on fire, the fire truck rolls up, puts out the flames, and leaves. You do not get a bill for $5,000 from the fire department for every gallon of water they sprayed on your roof.
Why?
Because we as a society decided that public safety is a collective responsibility. However, Wall Street realized there was an astronomical amount of money to be made from human panic. Private equity firms began quietly buying up private ambulance companies across the country, consolidating them into massive, near-monopolistic corporations. Companies like Global Medical Response or American Medical Response, AMR, are backed by massive financial conglomerates. When a private equity firm buys an ambulance service, their primary goal is not to improve patient outcomes or protect the community. Their sole, legally mandated goal is to maximize returns for their investors. And how do you maximize returns on an emergency service? You squeeze the consumer at their absolute most vulnerable moment. If you are having a heart attack, you are not in a position to shop around. You cannot pull out your phone, open an app, and compare prices between 3 different ambulance providers. You cannot say, "Oh, Global Medical Response charges $4,000, but the local city service only charges $800, so please call the city service."
No.
You are dying. You take whatever vehicle shows up. Wall Street knows this. They understand that emergency medicine possesses what economists call perfectly inelastic demand. You will pay whatever they tell you to pay because the alternative is death. It is the ultimate captive market. This brings us to the second massive driver of these astronomical costs, the phenomenon of out-of-network billing. This is perhaps the most insidious trap in the entire American healthcare landscape. Let us say you are an American citizen who does everything right. You work a hard job, you pay your massive health insurance premiums every single month, and you make sure your primary care doctor and your local hospital are in-network. You think you are protected, but then you collapse on the street, just like Dr. Laurent did. An ambulance arrives. It picks you up and takes you to your in-network hospital. Months later, you receive a massive bill for thousands of dollars. You call your insurance company, furious, demanding to know why they did not cover it. The insurance representative, speaking in a cold, robotic corporate tone, says, "Well, sir, the hospital you went to is in-network, but the specific ambulance company that picked you up off the street is a private contractor that is out-of-network. Therefore, we only cover $500 of the charge. And you are responsible for the remaining $300. This is called balance billing, and it is a multi-billion-dollar predatory practice. The federal government passed the No Surprises Act recently to protect consumers from surprise out-of-network bills at hospitals. But guess what group spent millions of dollars lobbying Washington to ensure they were largely exempted or carved out of various tight regulations? The private ambulance industry. They successfully fought to protect their right to ambush you with massive, unregulated bills because they know that is where their profit margins lie. The third factor is the sheer, unbelievable scale of administrative bloat. For every single doctor or paramedic providing actual medical care in the United States, there are literally dozens of billing specialists, insurance adjusters, corporate lawyers, and administrative executives sitting in glass towers whose entire job is to navigate the chaotic, intentionally confusing paperwork of the medical system. The billing process itself costs a fortune. Ambulance companies have to hire entire departments just to fight with insurance companies, who automatically deny claims in an attempt to save money. The ambulance company then inflates the initial bill to $5,000, knowing that the insurance company will negotiate it down to $2,000, or that they will have to spend months chasing the patient for a settlement. The system is designed to be inefficient because, within that inefficiency, corporations can hide their bloated profits. And where does this leave the actual paramedics? This is the most tragic part of the entire equation. The people who are actually jumping out of the truck, performing CPR, inhaling diesel fumes, and dealing with the psychological trauma of seeing human beings die in their arms, these people are paid absolute garbage wages. In many major American cities, a highly trained, certified EMT or paramedic makes between $15 to $22 an hour. That is less than what a shift manager makes at a fast food restaurant or a fulfillment center worker makes at an Amazon warehouse. Let that reality sink in. The system is charging Dr. Laurent $4,872 for a 10-minute ride, but the two human beings who actually saved his life in the back of that truck are barely making enough money to pay their own rent. The money isn't going to medical excellence. It isn't going to competitive wages for heroes. It is going directly to corporate overhead, executive bonuses, and Wall Street dividends. It is a system that strips wealth from the sick and the working class and transfers it directly to the financial elite. Part 4. The Personal Perspective, American Coping Mechanisms. Now, let us step away from the numbers and look at the cultural reality of how Americans actually live within this broken framework. As an observer of international culture, as someone who watches how different societies operate, the most fascinating and deeply tragic aspect of this entire situation is not the system itself. It is how Americans have psychologically adapted to it. Americans have developed a set of bizarre, deeply dangerous coping mechanisms to avoid interacting with their own healthcare system. We have normalized things that would make an ordinary European citizen's jaw drop to the floor in absolute disbelief. The most prominent example of this is the Uber ambulance phenomenon. Ask any millennial or Gen Z American living in a major metropolitan area what they would do if they broke their arm or cut their hand deeply. The vast majority of them will tell you, without a single hint of irony, I am calling an Uber life. Think about how insane that is. We live in a society where citizens actively choose to ride in a standard civic sedan, driven by an untrained, random gig worker who is listening to a podcast while bleeding out or holding a broken bone, simply because they are terrified that calling a professional medical vehicle will bankrupt them. Uber drivers have literally become the unofficial, untrained first responders of the United States. There are thousands of stories of Uber drivers frantically dropping off passengers at emergency room entrances, cleanup fees being charged to passengers because they bled on the fabric seats. All because the passenger knew that a $30 Uber ride plus a $150 cleaning fee is still thousands of dollars cheaper than dialing 911. When a society reaches a point where its citizens are actively avoiding professional medical infrastructure out of financial terror, that society's infrastructure has fundamentally failed. It is no longer serving the people are serving the system. Another uniquely American coping mechanism is the normalization of medical crowdfunding. Walk onto the homepage of GoFundMe on any given day of the week. What do you see? You do not see people raising money to fund indie art films, tech startups, or school field trips. The overwhelming majority of the top campaigns on GoFundMe are average, hardworking Americans begging their friends, family, and complete strangers on the internet for money, so they do not lose their homes to cancer treatment, insulin costs, or emergency hospital bills. GoFundMe has literally become the default, de facto safety net for the American working class. The CEO of GoFundMe himself went public a few years ago and explicitly stated that it is a profound tragedy that his platform has been forced to become a major player in the American healthcare ecosystem. He openly admitted that the platform was never designed to handle the massive, unending wave of medical emergencies that the American government refuses to address. We have normalized the idea that if you get sick, you have to launch a viral marketing campaign for your own survival. If you don't have enough followers on social media, if your story isn't sad or compelling enough to get clicks, then you simply go into debt or die. It is a digital, dystopian popularity contest for basic human survival. But perhaps the most disturbing coping mechanism of all is the widespread culture of medical avoidance. Millions of Americans live in a state of chronic anxiety, actively ignoring symptoms of serious illness because they cannot afford the diagnostic testing. They feel a strange lump, they experience chronic chest tightness, they have severe abdominal pain, and instead of going to a doctor immediately when the condition is treatable, they wait. They make excuses. They take over-the-counter painkillers. They check WebMD. They pray it goes away.
Why?
Because they know that walking into a clinic means a $200 copay, a $1,500 blood test, and a $3,000 imaging scan. They wait until the pain becomes completely unbearable, until they collapse, and by the time they are finally forced into an emergency room, the illness has progressed from an easily treatable early-stage condition to a terminal, catastrophic crisis. The American healthcare system actively disincentivizes preventative care through its pricing model, which ironically ends up costing the entire economy billions of dollars more in late-stage emergency treatments. We have collectively developed a form of societal Stockholm syndrome. We defend the very system that is actively bleeding us dry. We listen to corporate politicians tell us that American healthcare is the best in the world because we have choice. But what choice do we actually have? The choice between dying on a sidewalk or signing away our financial future. That is not freedom. That is a hostage situation. Part 5. The core contrast. The lie of the best healthcare in the world. To fully understand the depth of this crisis, we have to dismantle the massive, corporate-funded propaganda machine that keeps this system alive. Every time an American politician or a healthcare CEO steps in front of a microphone to defend the current status quo, they always repeat the exact same tired, manipulative mantra: America has the best healthcare system in the world. If we change it, if we adopt a European-style system, we will destroy innovation, we will have massive wait times, and bureaucrats will decide whether you live or die. This is the great American lie. It is a highly coordinated, multi-million-dollar gaslighting campaign designed to keep the American public terrified of any meaningful reform. Let us look at the actual facts, the hard metrics, and contrast them with this corporate narrative. First, let us look at the claim of quality. Is American healthcare actually the best in the world in terms of outcomes? The data says absolutely not. The Commonwealth Fund, an independent, nonpartisan research group, consistently ranks the healthcare systems of developed nations across multiple metrics, including access, administrative efficiency, equity, and healthcare outcomes. In every single study conducted over the past decade, where does the United States rank among the world's wealthiest nations? Dead last. The United States spends significantly more on healthcare per capita than any other nation on Earth. We spend roughly 17% to 18% of our total GDP on healthcare. That is double what countries like Japan, France, the UK, or Germany spend. If you spend double the money of every other competitor, you should logically have the absolute best results, right? You should have the highest life expectancy, the lowest infant mortality rates, and the healthiest population. But the exact opposite is true. The United States has the lowest life expectancy among comparable high-income nations. Our maternal mortality rate, the rate at which women die during or shortly after childbirth, is not just higher than Europe, it is actively rising, and it is exponentially worse than countries with a fraction of our wealth. Our infant mortality rate is a national disgrace. We have higher rates of chronic illness, higher rates of avoidable deaths, and a population that is fundamentally unhealthier than our European counterparts. We are paying premium, luxury, high-end corporate prices for basement-tier societal outcomes. Second, let us dismantle the terrifying myth of the long European wait times. This is the ultimate boogeyman used to scare Americans. Corporate media outlets love to run sensationalized stories about a man in Canada or the UK who had to wait 6 months for a hip replacement or a knee surgery. They present this as absolute proof that universal healthcare is a failure. But here is what they intentionally hide from you. Yes, in public systems, non-urgent, elective surgeries like a routine knee replacement can have wait times depending on the hospital's capacity. But do you know what has zero wait time in Europe? Emergency medicine. If you are having a heart attack, if you are in a car accident, if you have acute appendicitis, you do not wait a single second. You are rushed into surgery immediately, using world-class equipment, by world-class doctors, and you are treated with the highest priority. And let us look at the unspoken reality of American wait times. Do Americans not wait for healthcare? Walk into any major metropolitan emergency room in the United States on a Friday night. What do you see? The waiting rooms are packed to the brim with human suffering. People are sitting in hard plastic chairs for 6, 8, 10 hours, clutching their stomachs, bleeding through bandages, waiting to see a doctor.
Why?
Because millions of uninsured or underinsured Americans have no primary care doctor, so they are forced to use the emergency room as their standard clinic, completely overwhelming the system. Furthermore, America has a massive, hidden wait time that Europeans never experience, the insurance authorization wait time. In the United States, even if your doctor decides that you need an urgent MRI, a specific cancer medication, or a specialized surgery immediately, you cannot just get it. First, the hospital has to send a request to your private health insurance company. Then, a corporate insurance adjuster, a person who has never met you, never seen your medical chart, and who often has no medical degree, looks at the request and decides whether the insurance company wants to approve or deny the procedure. Americans regularly wait weeks or months, fighting insurance denials, appealing decisions, and begging corporate entities to allow them to receive the care their own doctors recommended. That is not choice or efficiency. That is a corporate death panel. Third, let us address the argument regarding medical innovation. The defenders of the American system argue that our massive profits are necessary to fund the research and development of new, life-saving drugs and medical technologies that the rest of the world benefits from. They claim that if we cap profits or lower prices, innovation will dry up completely. This is a complete distortion of the financial reality. The vast majority of foundational, groundbreaking scientific research in the United States is not funded by private pharmaceutical companies. It is funded by the American taxpayer through federal grants via the National Institutes of Health (NIH). The basic science, the hard work of discovering molecules and understanding diseases, happens in publicly funded university labs. Private pharmaceutical corporations then swoop in, purchase the patents or license the technology, do the final stage clinical testing, and then charge the American public $10,000 a month for a drug that was built on public research. Where does the pharmaceutical industry actually spend its massive profits? If you look at their financial filings, major drug companies regularly spend significantly more money on marketing and advertising than they do on actual research and development. America is one of only 2 countries in the entire civilized world, the other being New Zealand, that allows direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. Turn on your television for an hour. Every single commercial break is packed with slick, high-budget ads for expensive medications, featuring smiling seniors riding bicycles or families having picnics, followed by a rapid voiceover listing horrific side effects. Those ads cost billions of dollars. Those billions come directly from the inflated prices charged to sick patients. The current American model is not a medical system. It is a highly financialized corporate machine that views human illness as a commodity to be traded, optimized, and exploited for shareholder value. It is an industry that converts human suffering into corporate wealth, and it uses fear, propaganda, and political corruption to ensure that the American people never realize how badly they are being cheated. Part 6. The Insider's Verdict. Can the system be saved? When we look at the entire scope of this crisis, from the shocking $4,872 bill received by Dr. Julian Laurent to the systemic corruption of private equity firms and the cultural trauma of a population terrified of its own ambulances, we are left with a final, unavoidable question. Can this system be saved? Can the American healthcare model be reformed from within? Or is it so fundamentally broken, so completely rotten at its core, that it needs to be completely dismantled and rebuilt from scratch? The hard, uncomfortable truth that most politicians refuse to admit is that you cannot fix a system that is working exactly how it was designed to work. The American healthcare system is not broken. It is working perfectly. The problem is that its objective is not to keep you healthy. Its objective is to generate maximum profit for insurance giants, pharmaceutical conglomerates, and private equity investors. From the perspective of a Wall Street shareholder, a system that charges $5,000 for a 10-minute ride and $50 for a single aspirin tablet is an unqualified, massive success. It is a highly efficient wealth extraction engine. If you attempt to apply minor, incremental reforms, like tweaking insurance regulations or adding minor pricing transparency laws, the corporate medical-industrial complex simply finds a new loophole, hires a new army of lobbyists, and shifts the cost somewhere else. They spend billions of dollars funding political campaigns on both sides of the aisle to ensure that any real, structural change is dead on arrival. Look at what happens to any political figure who proposes a true universal, single-payer healthcare system in America. They are instantly branded as radicals, socialists, and extremists who want to destroy American freedom. The corporate media apparatus mobilizes to convince the working class that having free healthcare at the point of service, something enjoyed by every single other developed nation on the planet, is a terrifying threat to their lifestyle. But let us look at the reality of what a healthy society should look like. A healthy society recognizes that there are certain things that should never be tied to a profit motive. We do not privatize the military. We do not ask citizens to enter their credit card information before the military defends the border. We do not privatize the police force. If someone is breaking into your home, you call 911, and the police arrive without a billing specialist attached to them. We do not privatize public education entirely. We understand that an educated populace benefits the entire nation. Human health is no different. When you allow human health to be governed by the laws of the free market, you create an inherently immoral society. The free market works beautifully for luxury items, tech gadgets, fashion, and entertainment. If Apple wants to charge $1,500 for a new iPhone, that is completely fine. If you cannot afford it, you simply don't buy it. Your life goes on. Your survival does not depend on a smartphone. But your survival does depend on an ambulance. Your survival does depend on insulin. Your survival does depend on chemotherapy. When a corporation has the power to set the price on your survival, that is not a free market. That is economic feudalism. The story of Dr. Julian Laurent is not just an isolated anecdote about an expensive vacation mishap. It is an international diagnostic report on the terminal state of the American identity. It is a clear, definitive warning from the global community that America's priorities are deeply, dangerously warped. We cannot continue to call ourselves the greatest country on earth while our citizens are bleeding out in Ubers to avoid ambulance bills. We cannot claim moral superiority to the rest of the world while our families are launching GoFundMe campaigns to pay for cancer treatments. We cannot boast about our freedom when a single medical emergency can strip away a lifetime of hard work, bankrupting a family and turning them into financial refugees in their own country. It is time for an absolute awakening. It is time for the American public to stop defending the corporations that are exploiting them. It is time to look across the Atlantic, to look at the systems that protect human dignity in Europe, Canada, and Australia, and demand what should have been ours from the very beginning. A healthcare system that views us as human beings to be healed, not as line items to be looted. The world is watching us. They are not watching with admiration. They are watching with absolute horror. The choice is entirely ours. We can continue to protect the profits of Wall Street investors, or we can choose to protect the lives of our own people. Until we make that fundamental shift, every single one of us is just one accident, one sudden pain, One 10-minute ambulance ride away from total financial ruin. Welcome to America. Get sick at your own risk.